an historic figure in the business of music, composing, arranging, instrumentalist, and I imagine mentor to many. Welcome in, Bill Holman.
Thank you very much, Leigh. It's good to talk to you.
You represent pre- and post-World War II and to the present day, the scene in Los Angeles. But what I'm curious about, when you were very young, in that pre-war time and immediately post-World War II after your service, what drew you to the big band and jazz in particular?
Well, when I was growing up, the top 40 was all big bands, so they played big bands all the time on the radio. And when I got into that, I don't remember exactly when, probably when I was about 12 years old or something, I was able to hear big bands all day long on the radio, and it gave me a chance to hear, what everybody was doing, because they were playing jazz bands and commercial bands and everything. And I stored up a lot of this music in my head. So when I did start writing, I had the vocabulary well established, and so it didn't take me long at all to start writing as soon as I got some of the mechanical things figured out. But that was the pre-war experience, and so when I went in the Navy, I didn't do any music in the Navy. I was in an officer training program, and I was studying engineering. And after I got out of the Navy, I went back to UCLA to continue engineering, and in the space of one semester, I realized that this wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I'd had the music thing in the back of my head for some time. And so I finally got serious about it, and somebody told me about a music school, kind of a vocational school where they only taught music subjects, practical music. And I transferred there and never looked back.
Bill Holman's on the line, and we had been talking earlier about the molding of his career. And I think we left off, Bill, somewhere at Westlake College, and a name comes up to me, Russ Garcia, at that same period in time.
Russ started teaching a class at the school. I'd heard his name, but I didn't know much about him. But he started teaching an arranging class at school, and I liked what he was saying. I liked his approach and everything, so I decided to see if I could study privately with him, which I did. And he had the book came out while I was studying with him. It's a very well-received arranging book, and he pretty much, in the private lessons, taught the same things that was in the book, but we went into everything a little deeper. And he was the first one that exposed me to the idea of form in music. My idea of an arrangement up until that time was just like free thought, like just from one idea to the next, and so forth. And he showed me how to be more economical with the material and to reuse it to give it continuity. And several years later, it finally sank in. And now form is one of my main considerations in writing.
I'm talking with Bill Holman, and Bill is a performing artist as well as a composer or arranger. And I just want to mention maybe 4 names right here, and in 1,000 words or less, your report back, as I mentioned, Stan Kenton.
Well, Stan was a wonderful man to work for. He treated everybody in the band like an individual, and he was always available to hear troubles or elation from the guys in the band. And when I joined the band, I didn't know quite what to write for him because I didn't want to and wasn't able to write the progressive jazz that he'd become well known for. And I knew he didn't want to have just plain swing arrangements, and as he called it Tommy Dorsey music, which referred to a dance band. He didn't want to have a dance band. So it took me several months to decide to figure out a compromise between his conception and mine. And when I finally started to figure something out, he was very encouraging all the time. He'd say, "Holman, when are you going to write something?" And he accepted everything I wrote. And eventually, it got to the point where it satisfied us both.
Well, here's a name that strikes me as a complete contrast in a way. Charlie Barnet.
Uh-huh. Well, I really enjoyed my time with Charlie. It was a little too short because I got in kind of towards the end of his career. But he had a wonderful book, library of music from his old hits, from a lot of Ellington-style things, and really wonderful music. So I really enjoyed having the chance to play that. And Charlie was he was a firm leader. He knew what he wanted, and if you didn't produce it, you would hear from him. And he was also a good musician, a much better musician than most people give him credit for.
Well, in talking about musicians and experiences, two contrasting names, Mel Lewis.
Yeah. What's the other name?
Shorty Rogers.
Okay. Well, they're not going to contrast with each other. Well, in a way, yeah, because Mel was he was very headstrong and determined in his way, and Shorty was kind of a meek, very pliant kind of guy. But Mel was a wonderful character. He, aside from being the best big band drummer that I had ever heard. But he was, like I said, he was headstrong, and he didn't take any grief from anyone. And it was a pleasure to work with him. He made a conductor's job so much easier. We worked a lot in Germany on productions where I would just take a bunch of new music over there and have to rehearse it quickly so we could record it. And Mel was a very big help in that because he was kind of like Buddy Rich in that he could hear a piece once or twice and have it pretty firmly in his mind. So, and he was a wonderful friend, too.
Shorty Rogers.
Well, as I say, Shorty's the opposite of Mel. Shorty was a very bashful guy, and he didn't like to take chances. He liked to keep the keys in simple keys, like B flat or F. And but a wonderful person, and he wrote some good music. That just before I joined Stan Kenton's band, he had brought in some music that had made the band start to think about swinging, and kind of eased the way for the people that came later. But I had a lot of fun with Shorty.
Bill Holman, thanks for taking time to be with us on this night. I'd like to talk with you again about your projects, particularly in this age and time, and that world of Felonious Monk. Shall we talk about that a little bit later?
Sure.
Welcome into Minnesota Public Radio once again for this weekend exploration of your life in music.
Thanks, Leigh. It's good to talk to you.
Well, your projects. I remember perhaps that challenging time when you first joined Stan Kenton. You did produce an arrangement that just amazed a lot of people. Invention for guitar and trumpet. And then, more recently in the year, in this 21st century, you're doing projects around the music of Felonious Monk. What a contrast.
Well, things do move along.
Yes, they do. And that world of Monk, how did you begin to frame his music and think about it after you had been planted years ago in the Kenton Band and out with organizations like Charlie Barnet, and it doesn't. It's that progress and that evolution that I'm interested in.
Well, throughout my career, I've always listened to jazz players. And of course, I was when I was playing saxophone, I was a jazz player myself. But I'd always listened to small groups, and Felonious Monk, I'd heard of him as being one of the founders of the bebop movement in the late 30s and early 40s. But and we played a couple of his tunes throughout the years, but he was always regarded as piano players in particular didn't like him because his technique was so different from theirs, and what he played was so different from what they grew up to be being taught was the right way to play. And gradually, people got to hear more of his songs, and they would record, especially "Straight No Chaser" got to be his probably his best known tune, aside from "Around Midnight," which came later. But my manager actually suggested that I do the CD of his music, because I was a little reluctant to try it, because everyone has decided through the years that Monk was the best practitioner of his own music, and I should say the best interpreter of his own music. But the more I thought about it, I could see all this material, great material to work with, and I decided, well, since most of the people that have done his music have tried to make it sound like him, I'll just jump off the deep end and try to make it sound like me too. So I did, and lo and behold, it worked out okay. And even some of the rabid Monk fans that I was the most afraid of have come to me and said that how much they like the music too. So we took a chance, and it came off.
Bill Holman, not only did it come off, but it probably is a part of our whole classic literature and jazz. You arrangers out there and fans as well, you've got to hear it. If you haven't heard it, here in the year 2007. One postscript, too. You brought this language of big bands and jazz to the German radio system, and you might tell us a little bit about that in a postscript.
Well, in 1980, I got a call from the West German Network in Cologne, Germany. They were going to do a Dizzy Gillespie, or I guess it was a bebop program, and they were going to have I think Dizzy and Sonny Stitt and a lot of the real bebop stars. were there, and they asked me to write some arrangements, and so I did, and eventually it got done with other people. By the time they got around to doing it, all of the original people had canceled out. But that led to my working for that network about once a year for the next 20 years. And I would write a whole production of new music and take it over there, and we'd rehearse for a week and then record for a week and do some concerts. And it was a wonderful opportunity because, as you know, the bands in the States here were disappearing. So nobody was really buying jazz arrangements for their own band. So it was a great opportunity to have a lot of freedom to do what I wanted and to write some original music.
Bill Holman, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance and share this with our listeners. Thank you for taking time to be with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Leigh.